If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what is your most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story? A few years ago I was walking through the woods off the beaten track a bit and I smelt this really overpowering sweet smell. Being nosy, I pulled back the undergrowth to have a look and found a dead body. The guy had clearly been there a while and wasn't looking great, all swollen and green and black with various runny bits. The local wildlife had also been dining well for a few days. I called the police, who told me to wait with the body until they arrived. Being in the middle of nowhere, it took a while for them to arrive and it got dark and I was just sat there in the dark with him for a long time. It turned out he had committed suicide. For a long time afterwards I had dreams about him and he would talk to me and not nice things. Mainly about how he was angry I had disturbed his resting place and he wanted me to kill myself. Probably just my imagination, but all pretty disturbing at the time. He still turns up in my dreams from time to time and no doubt will be tonight after typing this. This happened to me twice over this last summer, but it was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. Where I live, there is a lot of stories of skinwalkers and things of that nature, but I never really thought they were real, but still kind of freaked me out. There's this place next to a bluff where there are supposedly these skinwalkers and other things of that nature. So late at night, around 1 in the morning actually, we went to this place. It was hard to get to, and it's blocked off by a fence except in one part, which is the only place I know of. As soon as we drove through the fence, I got chills. My buddy was half asleep because it was very late, and he woke up from all the bumps. I heard him gasp and I looked over at him and he was ghost white and terrified out of his mind. He said, "We need to leave. Now." We left because he was freaking us out. Later he told us he saw a little girl running up the hill, and as soon as we cleared the hill ourselves, no one was there. I wasn't too sure about this because he has just woken up and might have just been flipping out. But one day me and some of the same friends went to that same place, minus my friend that saw the girl. It was just getting dark so I wasn't as scared. It was a bit of a hike downhill, down some clefts. Me and my friend were ahead of the others, and we both stopped at a growing sound. It sounded like a dog, or coyote, which aren't uncommon here. Either way, we ran back to the top of the hill to our other friends and turned around to look at where we were just standing. We saw a guy, just standing where we just were, looking at us. We went home. Stupid us, went out there later that night with more friends. This time it was only me that got scared shitless. We were just messing around, rock crawling in a lifted truck. I was sticking my head out the window to spot the driver so he didn't hit any trees or rocks. Then it happens. I hear a little girl, screaming the most blood-curdling scream. I flipped out, asked if anyone else heard it. No one else did, so I convinced myself it was just in my head. Until the driver heard it later that night, at the same place. Haven't gone back there, but every time I go, I get scared shitless. Okay, so this happened to me last summer when I was back at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 a.m. and I was in my room on my computer when I got a call from my sister. Now that was already a little bit weird since my sister's room is just down the hallway from mine and she could have just came in my room. I went to pick up and the call ended as soon as I reached the phone. I figured that she wanted to speak with me, so I got up and went to her room. As soon as I reached her door, she started screaming that someone was in the room with her, so I busted in and of course nobody was here. After she stopped crying, she told me that she woke up and saw a dark shadow just centimeters from her face, and that's when she screamed. So I told her that she called me. She told me that her phone is not in her room and that she was sleeping. Sure enough, her phone is actually downstairs in her purse. The weird part is that I have the log of her call on my phone, but she doesn't. Never managed to explain this one. When I was in high school, I had a really good friend who lived next door to a house that was always up for sale. People would move out in the middle of the night without a word, and it hadn't had the same owner for more than 6 months straight for a couple of years. One night we were really bored and he suggested we go explore the house next door since it had sat empty for a while. We go around back and there's a dog door that he can crawl through, and he unlocks the door and lets me in. The house itself is really unremarkable. It looked like it was built in maybe the 1950s and was a craftsman-style house in an older, nicer part of town. My friend's house was similarly built. The kitchen had a really nice built-in breakfast table set against a picture window. The house's electricity was off, but you could see the street light through the window. My friend and I sit down, on the floor, across from this table, and are just hanging out, talking. Why? Who knows? All of a sudden my friend screams and in that instant, my vision goes black. But it wasn't that I just couldn't see, my body was engulfed in this sickly coldness from head to toe. I start screaming and I feel my friend's hand grabbing mine and pulling me in some direction forcefully. My vision slowly comes back and I start to warm up when I realize that we're outside under the street light. It was December and should have been much warmer inside of that house. Finally I look at my friend and he looks scared. I'm really confused and kind of panic myself and finally ask him what happened. He says that as I was talking, a black thing. This figure that was all black and only had the vague shape of a girl crawled out from under the table and sat on top of me. Apparently I started groping around with my eyes wide open, like I couldn't see, and he was so freaked out he pulled me out of the house. We're still friends and we bring it up every now and then, but the story itself never changes and it still sends chills down my spine. To this day, I've never felt such blackness or coldness in my life. It was palpable, almost sticky. For a couple of days afterward, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling, and I could never walk past that house again. Ugh. I'm scared to get out of bed now. When we first moved into the house I grew up in, I used to hear things calling my name from the opposite end of the house. Like, I would be in my room playing with Legos or something, and I would hear my dad call my name from his room. So I'd go to my parents' bedroom and ask them what they wanted, and they'd always tell me that they never called my name. Being a little kid, I honestly started to think that they were playing a joke on me, because this happened about once every couple of days. Well, one night it happened and I went to ask them what they wanted, like always. But right as I stepped into their room, I heard my mom's voice calling for me from the living room, which is all the way on the other side of the house. It was at that exact point that I knew no one was tricking me, because I was looking at both of my parents sitting in front of me. I kinda kept this to myself until my brother was diagnosed with partial narcolepsy. One of the symptoms of narcolepsy is apparently oral hallucinations, so I thought maybe I had it too. Went and got myself checked, completely fine. So I have no idea what was calling my name all those years, and I still hear it at night whenever I come visit and stay over. Not me but my sister. So growing up my sister had an imaginary friend. She said she was an older lady and she was nice and her name was EE. She talked to her and played with her all that jazz until she was probably 4 or so and then it stopped. Fast forward to when my sister was about 10. My mom isn't home, she got a call to go to the nursing home for GPA, so she bolts with Pops. My sister and I shared a room at the time and she was in there doing whatever and I was on the other end of the house. All of a sudden I hear the radio in our room click on, turn all the way up, turn all the way down, and go off. This happened like 3 times, so I go in there to be all like WTF kid, knock it off, and she is sitting in our room just white as a ghost. I go over to the radio to unplug it, no plug. No batteries, only radio in the house. I look at her and she goes, "It was EE, I saw her, it was EE." So I call mom, freaking out, and mom is so upset. Apparently grandpa had just passed away. Okay, weird, I drop incident whatever. A few days later at the funeral a relative comes up to us and gives us a pic she found. My sister goes, "Hey, it is EE." It was a pictures of my grandparents when they got married. My grandmother died before I was even thought of, when my mom was 11. We live in the home my mom grew up in. We have no pictures of her at all as my step-grandmother got rid of them all when she moved into the house a few years after mom's death. Woke up. Clock says 3:34 a.m. I'm 17 and in my bedroom. It's pitch black but I hear some rattling downstairs. Terrified, I quietly tiptoe to my parents' room. Weird, it's empty. Where are my parents at 3:34 a.m.? Go upstairs to my brother's room. He's usually awake all night, but while the light is on, no one is in the room. So I guess whatever those noises are downstairs, it must be them. Why are they awake? Maybe someone died? I go downstairs. In the middle of my living room is what looks like 2 men stealing our TV. No one else is in sight. I run upstairs as quietly as possible, shut and lock my door. Suddenly there's banging on the door. I wake up. It was a dream and the relief washes over me. I look over at the clock. Weird coincidence, it's 3:34 a.m. I'm shaking, but decide to go downstairs to prove to myself that everything's fine. I go downstairs. The 2 men are in my kitchen, screaming at my parents and brother. I run upstairs to my bedroom and lock the door. 10 seconds later, I hear banging. I woke up. It's 3:34 a.m. this time. I had actually woken up and I don't manage to fall back asleep for about 36 hours. I lived in a bizarre little house as a child. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house except freestanding, with 3 floors, a basement and an attic. It was full of quirks, such as 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, a backyard so small that you could not take 5 paces without hitting the fence, and an old-timey rope pull dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, but unfortunately it was incredibly old, and half of its charm was the fact that it seemed to have been designed by an inarticulate conclave of lunatics, and eventually the repair costs exceeded what my parents were willing to sink into it, and we had to move. Preparing for the move was a chore. I packed most of my stuff myself, and I had taken to throwing stuff down the dumbwaiter and shoving all my clothes so thickly in my closet that they became a single, solid brick of fabric. While clearing that closet out, in fact, I came across a feature I hadn't noticed before, an attic entrance in the roof. Being an adventurous kid, I opened her up, stood on the closed brick, and began my first and last exploration into the topmost part of our weird little house. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as it should have been. The place was strung with old, red Christmas lights which still burned with leftover incandescents, and a dozen little cracks and holes peeped down into all the bedrooms below. The second thing I noticed was that the place was set up for habitation. The insulation was plasticed away, there was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets, and a rusted mint green refrigerator which still worked when I tested it. The third thing was the bones. There were a lot of bones. I was a kid at the time, with a limited understanding of anatomy, but there were bones of all types heaped into a series of piles around the center of the attic. Small and large, clean and white, from every and any imaginable sort of creature, haphazardly stacked in a half-dozen osseous clumps. 2 of them were blackened, as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest those blackened piles were scrawled in dark bone char messages. Mostly they were just smears, but the word sorry appeared more than once. That room had been sitting over my head, for 8 years, while I slept. When I was 13, my grandmother was dying of cancer, and my mother and I stayed at her house and took care of her during her last few weeks. One night at 3 or so in the morning, my mother ran into my room and told me that my grandmother, who was by this time completely bedridden, entered my mother's room, woke her up and then walked out of the room. There was no creepiness at the time, just a genuine concern for what my grandmother could possibly be doing up at 3 a.m. when she was literally days away from dying. We ran into her room, and sure enough she had passed away. Obviously, given the shock of my grandmother dying, my mother and I didn't sit around chatting about how weird the whole experience was, but months or perhaps even years later I asked her about that night, and she has no memory of telling me that my grandmother was up and walking around the house. She doesn't even remember what woke her up or why she woke me up. Gives me shivers just writing it. When I was 8, my family moved from urban South Florida to a really small town in North Florida. It was like from a Goosebumps book. A lot of weird stuff has happened in the 15 years since we moved there, but the weirdest has got to be when my sister moved back in with my parents. My sister's husband had been shipped off to Afghanistan, so she was left alone with a newborn son. Not wanting to go through the soul-crushing loneliness of raising a newborn all alone in a trailer in the woods, she moved back into my parents' house for a while. She said it started first when the headboard of her bed would slam every now and then. Then one day she woke up because somebody was tickling her. She didn't really think about it until one night she woke my mom up by screaming, "My sister is almost 30, she's not a little kid," and my mom went in and the whole ducking bed was rocking and shaking like really violently up down, to the sides, like a boat going through white water. But, my mom and sister have been through a lot of shit, so they persevered. One night my sister was nursing her son and something grabbed her ponytail and started yanking her head around. My mom went in the room and very sternly, like talking to a bad kid, said, "I understand things are different. There's a little baby here and there never has been before. You're curious, I understand that. But you will not touch them anymore. You can look, you can stay. You were here before us, but I swear to God you are not allowed to touch them." It stopped happening. About a month ago I went over to my girlfriend's house. Except I felt really uneasy when I went into the living room. Turns out, they replaced a china cabinet with one of her grandmothers whom passed away a few months back. Her grandmother was bedridden in the hospital and I've ever gotten to meet her. I felt uneasy the whole time. Being around her grandmother's furniture made me so anxious and almost sad. When I told her, she said it was probably nothing. She went to the bathroom. When I went over to the cabinet, it was about 6 feet tall. Dark wood. It had 2 doors on the side and glass up front. And in the back was a mirror. I was looking at the teacups and small baby dolls when I could swear I saw someone in the mirror behind me. Just a silhouette. I called out to my girlfriend. But as I did, I heard a shrill screech from the bathroom. I start pounding on the door. And it opens. She was sitting on the floor. Crying. She said she saw someone in the bathroom mirror. We booked it out of her house. No shoes. No jacket. Nothing, and right to my car. I dove for an hour or so. With no destination. When I returned her to her house, her mom was sitting on the doorstep. She said she kept seeing shadows move. When I was a child, I lived in an old Victorian house, and I would always hear laughing while I was trying to sleep. I was an only child with a single mother, and when I was about 5 to 6, I would wake up hearing laughter in the hallway in the middle of the night. After mentioning this to my mum, she swore it was probably just the TV being left on late. One night, I awoke hearing the laughter in my room. I went to sit up but felt like there was someone holding my shoulders down, invisible hands gripping into my shoulders while I heard laughing. I screamed my little heart out. My mum ran into my room, flicking on the bedside lamp, convincing me it was just a dream, until I said, "But my shoulders hurt." She lifted up my t-shirt and there were 2 adult-sized hand prints on my shoulders. I honestly thought I had imagined it and that it had never happened, but the other day I mentioned it in passing to my mum and she went blanket white and said, "I don't want to remember that." We were living with my grandparents at the time. In my aunt's room was a 2-foot-tall Victorian-style doll converted into a lamp. The lamp would only turn on by holding the doll's cold plastic hand and raising and lowering the arm. The doll stood on a nightstand next to my aunt's bed, facing the door, greeting everyone who entered with a creepy dead-eye smile. I was alone in the house one day and wanted a blanket from my aunt's closet. Luckily for this scaredy cat, there were 2 important factors that worked in my favor. 1, it was mid-afternoon and wouldn't need the lamp's light, and 2, the closet was located immediately next to the door's entrance. So without lifting my gaze, I stared at the floor, entered the room and turned 180 degrees. Now my back was towards the doll. I quickly swung open the closet door and reached down for a blanket when suddenly something about the room was different, brighter, the light was on, and the peach fuzz hairs on the back of my neck uncurled. I froze for an eternity, then felt my survival instinct kick in and wanted to run screaming in horror, but before all that I still had to look. Man, I wish I hadn't looked. As I turned to exit the room, I lifted my stupid head only to confirm that the doll's hand was raised, and that it was pointed directly at me. Such traumatizing vision burned in my brain since I was 13. Much uneasy, creepy memory. One night when I was 13 years old, I had gotten my period for the first time and ended up sleeping on my back. I am an avid side sleeper, so this is a really weird position for me. I was dreaming, and in that dream I was sitting in a chair. I leaned it back on its back legs, and suddenly the chair started to slowly lean further and further back until I drifted into the eternity below me. This freaked me out, and I jolted awake. When I awoke, there was a figure leaning/hovering directly above my face, and all I saw was a hooded white, flat ovular and relatively featureless face with big ovular glassy eyes and an expression like it was determined to devour my eternal soul. The face was humanoid, very two-dimensional with thin, quivering angry lips and 2 holes where its nose would be, with eyebrows arched high up onto its forehead. I could feel an unworldly hate burning right through me as it loomed over me. It was absolutely the most helpless I have ever felt and would ever feel, because it was more than just my life I felt was at stake. I tried to move, scream, breathe, anything and couldn't. It was paralyzing me with its hate. I finally was able to let out the tiniest whimper, and as soon as the sound escaped me, it stood straight up and paced back and forth at the foot of my bed, still staring. It was like a force field was erected around me, and the frustration of it trying to get at me again was radiating throughout the room. It looked like a starving tiger behind glass, longing to lunge at its vulnerable prey, if only it weren't for the barrier between us. It was tall, almost all the way to the ceiling tall, and very thin. Wearing a long black cloak that covered everything except that terrifying face. I realized that it hadn't been floating over me, it had stood at the foot of my bed and leaned over it to hover its face over mine. I sat up in my bed, still frozen, just staring at it. My closet door behind it was cracked a few inches, and it swooped in there and peered out at me, never having broken eye contact. It continued to stare, quivering with hate and frustration until it slowly faded away. I turned my light on and it stayed on at night for a long time. I never slept with that closet door open again, and I didn't sleep again that night. I stayed the night in the living room with all of the lights on, just sitting on the couch. I later dismissed it as sleep paralysis for several years. It was a very believable and plausible explanation. Then I became friends with a girl who confided in me and told me a story. She was up late at night by herself with her door open. Something out in the living room by the kitchen caught her eye, and when she looked at it, she saw a figure standing there, beckoning her to approach it. She looked away, refocused on it, and it was still there. When she described it, she described the exact same creature that had attacked me. We each got a sketchbook and drew what we saw, and when she showed me hers, I was staring at my attacker all over again. She had never heard my story before telling hers. I'm native, Kiowa tribe. Whether this has any bearing on the occurrence that I'm about to describe, I don't know, it's merely for descriptive purposes. In any case, I grew up in a housing addition where most of the Kiowas in my hometown live since the addition was built. There were several other kids my age who lived there too. It consists of 3 streets connected by 2 streets on either side. My grandma lives on one of the corners at the end of the middle street. The street that connects all 3 main streets is bordered by a standard-sized farmer's barbed wire fence with farmers' properties on the other side. There's a street lamp on the corner just outside my grandma's house. One night when I was about 15 or so, I was out under that lamp with 2 friends talking and joking and whatnot. Suddenly I notice an animal-like figure sitting by the fence in the corner where the other main street starts. There's a street lamp there as well, but the figure was sitting in a spot that was obscured by shadows caused by a couple large trees with overhanging branches. It is facing away from the fence, is very still and makes no sound. It appears to be all black, sits in its hind legs like a canine, and I can clearly see its eyes emitting a soft, yellow glow. I point it out to my friends and ask, "What is that?" They turn to look, and we all stare trying to make sense of it. It looks straight at us for a few seconds that seem like eternity, then in one fluid motion, turning while it jumps over the fence, a good 5 feet high, it disappears into the darkness making no sound though there was only tall grass and fallen leaves and branches on the other side of the fence. Needless to say, we noped right out of there to my friend's grandma's house on the street on the far end of where we saw the creature. My family was at a powwow so nobody was at my grandma's house, and there was no way I was staying there alone after that. We told my friend's grandma what we saw, and she told us there are many mysterious things in the dark in the area of Oklahoma I come from, deep southwest, and to just be glad that it wasn't malignant. There are many strange things that happen out there. I've grown up with boatloads of stories from aunts, uncles, grandparents, etc. I don't think I want to know what it was. When I was 17 to 18 we lived in a little village called Shipton Bellinger in Hampshire, England. There's 2 towns fairly close that almost form an oval. I've always had trouble sleeping and was getting really into fitness then, so I started going out fairly regularly at 12/1 am and running, taking that oval route. It was a couple of miles run and tired me out nicely. So one night I'm coming to the end of the circuit. I'd gone via Tidworth and back up towards Losershall. I know some of you are Google mapping this. There's a secondary school called Castle Down which is near a back road which leads towards my village again, totally unlit with trees on either side and then big open fields. So I'm under a street lamp outside the school tightening my laces when there is a ton of noise from the woods. I figure it's just a deer or something. So I finish tying up and start to jog down the road. The noise is getting louder and louder. It gets to the point where something is audibly coming towards me through the woods and I hear the metal fence shake as something starts to climb it. Nope. I took off so ducking fast down that road, like full on sprinting the entire mile or so, constantly repeating to myself, if it can catch me it deserves me, and don't waste time looking, you know it's there, just run. Freaked me the duck out. I got into the village, stopped and had a look for about a minute to see if anything came out of the darkness, then I pegged it to my row and house. Still don't know if it was a person or animal or what. And quite frankly I'm glad I never got to find out. I was around 13 to 14, and in my upstairs bathroom. Being lazy I decided to go in without turning the light on, since the room was dimly lit by the light in the hallway. From the bathroom, I can see the woods in the backyard, kind of like a hill that went up into a sparsely populated second development behind mine. Anyway, I'm taking my glorious piss, when suddenly out the forest I see a light, not a direct light, like somebody shining a flashlight facing away from me, like an indirect illumination. I look at it, and I'm thinking, the hell's this? It doesn't move, it just appears and is motionless. I kinda figure it might be a tracker light that was kicked on by movement and continue about my business. The light's still on a good minute later and still facing away, and I walk up to the window. It turns completely around, like a flashlight. It's a wide spread and slowly focuses and sharpens as it shines directly at me, and it's a good quarter mile away. It's a steady stream of light, and it starts slowly moving towards the window, and extremely bright. I can its reflection in the glass, but it doesn't light the room up, just a bright light directly on me. To give you an idea, this is a 3rd-story bathroom, with a good 40-foot drop to the ground and a hill that goes up alongside of it, a quarter mile away, and this thing came at the window like it was running on solid ground. I run to turn the lights on. The second I do, it disappears, and to this day I still don't know what exactly it was. When I was about 10 or 11 I was living with my grandmother. My bed was in the corner of my room with the long side against the wall and right up against the window. Well, I slept with my head towards the wall, and I was usually turned towards the wall with the window. This window was a weird size and didn't have any blinds, just curtains. The curtains hung in front of the window, so there was a small gap towards the side of the window where you could see into or out of my room if you were standing at the right angle. I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep when I turned my eyes towards the window and saw something standing there, looking right at me. It was just a silhouette, but something about the way it was shaped just felt wrong. The head was large, the body was a little too skinny, and the way it was bent over just didn't feel right at all. I tried to act like I was asleep and rolled ever so slightly to try to get a better look, but it stood back up and ran away. It was tall too, at least 6 foot. I hopped out of bed and ran into the living room where my grandmother was watching the 10 o'clock news. I told her that I saw someone looking into my window and she grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. I followed her, and we looked around trying to figure out what it was. We couldn't see anything at all, and after that night we set the curtains further back so they completely blocked the window. Whatever the hell it was, we never figured it out. This one happened to my dad when he was a teenager. I'm not sure if it's true, but he avoids Ouija boards like the plague and almost begs for people never to use one. He lived in the middle of a huge city, and the neighborhood wasn't a wonderful place. He and 2 friends, let's call them Jake and Kyle, tended to hang out in graveyards and attempt little seances. Yes, it was a stupid thing to do, but they never got anything out of it. There was a spot in the main cemetery where they met up occasionally. It was like their secret spot to escape reality and simply hang with each other. It was on their way home from school, so it was never out of the way, except that Kyle usually drove. They decided to use a Ouija board one night and ask it some random questions. One of them was when Jake would die. The board answered with 1 week, they merely laughed it off and continued their usual lives. Then one day after school, about a week later, when my dad walked to that spot to see if his friends were there, he saw Jake standing there in a panic. My dad ran up to him to see what was wrong. Jake was waiting for him and said something along the lines of, "Kyle got in a bad car accident. I think he's dead. Run to his house and tell his parents." So my dad booked it to Kyle's house, and saw 2 cop cars parked on the curb. He ran inside and yelled, "Hey, I heard that Kyle was hurt. Where is he? Is he alright?" I saw Jake in the graveyard, and he told me Kyle was in a car accident. And then he noticed that Kyle was standing right there with minor bruises. Kyle, his parents and the cops just stared at him. Kyle said confusingly, "You saw who in the graveyard?" It turns out that a car accident did occur. Jake decided to ride home with Kyle, and someone else hit them on the way. Kyle was fine, but Jake took the full hit. The Ouija board was right, after all. I grew up in a house built in 1809. My parents bought it, after the previous owner, who was 89, passed away. It was a beautiful house, but the basement and my bedroom always made me feel uneasy. I don't recall when I started feeling/seeing things, but I was quite young. The closet in my bedroom was always extremely cold, and it almost smelled like a strong perfume. The door would often close and open on its own. I felt someone sitting on the edge of my bed, and felt like someone was watching me as I slept. Then the smells in the house started. My parents often left my brother and I on our own. We were old enough. I started to notice a smell in certain areas of the house. There was a window on the stairs that overlooked our neighborhood. It used to smell like, I would describe grandma perfume. Often the smell would move around like someone was walking around, and it always followed with an extreme cold area. Things moved without you touching them. Items would go missing and turn up in peculiar places. That was the main floor of the house. The basement was another story. I was horrified of this area. In older homes, the basements are usually dirt floor, and cement walls. The stairs to the basement were old and open, so you could see underneath them. Anytime I had to go down there, I ran or asked someone to come with me. I don't recall anything really happening, just an uneasy, scared feeling, until we renovated it when I was 14. Going back to my bedroom, I hated sleeping in it, because how cold it always seemed to be, the closet and the smell. My parents decided to renovate the basement so I could have my room down there. Great. I moved my room down there, and everything was okay for a while. I often felt like a man was watching me, or you would see a shadow and turn around quickly to see who was there, and obviously there was nothing. Then the pounding started. Late at night, it almost sounded like someone hitting on the wall from the inside. It would start slow and quiet, then build up to a pounding. Then the watching. I always felt like someone was standing right behind me, like a dark shadow. I never slept that well, and was always scared. I went into a really deep depression and hardly left the basement. One night, I was home alone and I went to get a drink of water. There was a back porch that had a glass door. It was winter and the porch was cold, so the glass had condensation on it. As I walked up the stairs, 2 handprints appeared on the door, and a breath mark appeared and disappeared. The dark man, as I called him, was watching me. I was literally paralyzed with fear, and remember staring almost like I couldn't stop myself for at least a few minutes. I ran outside and slept on the front porch that night until my brother got home the next morning. I get shivers thinking about this still. I was about 15 at the time, and moved out of the house about 7 months after this to attended college at 16. I did anything I could to move away from the house. Prologue, my mom later divorced my dad, and they sold the house. They later told me, the lady who owned the house before them, had passed away in my room. Also, her husband had an accident in the basement, no one said what exactly, and he was not a kind man to his wife. My parents only started believing that the house was haunted after things I had explained got worse after I moved out. I have heard stories that the new owners have things thrown at them, pictures fall off the walls, and sickly sweet smells and cold follows them. I have yet to step foot in the house since I left. No one in my family talks about it, or admits that it happened. So when I was 7 or 8 I went over to a friend's house after school. My friend's house was located on a relatively quiet street and had a large backyard surrounded by woods. My friend and I decided it'd be a good day to build a tree fort weed in the woods behind his house. We rounded up the necessary tools and brought his little brother to tag along. Some background to the story: there had recently been some daytime coyote spotting in the area, so we were nervous to begin with. I can remember discussing, with my friend and his younger brother, our plan to smash any attacking coyotes with a hammer. In retrospect probably would not have worked at all, but like I said, we were little kids. As we were walking along the path out into the woods, I can vividly remember looking down at the trail while walking and conversing with my friend when all of a sudden my friend's younger brother stopped dead in his tracks and remained there motionless. Before I really knew what was going on, my friend also stopped suddenly, so naturally I did the same and looked up to see what was frightening them. I can still, very clearly, remember the image. There was an older woman, I'd guess mid-late 70s if I had to say an age, with waving curly grayish white hair, dressed in a white gown roughly 25 yards ahead of us in the woods. She wasn't moving, she was just standing there, completely motionless, not looking at us, but rather through us, if that makes sense. I get chills just thinking of it now, but the image is still so clear in my mind. What I'm about to say next seems like a bit of a stretch, and it was more than likely my imagination getting the better of me. However, there was a faint aura of white light around the women. My friends and I have since discussed the incident, and they too describe the light. After standing paralyzed for what seemed like several moments, we watched as the woman slowly raised her right arm and pointed in the direction from which we'd come. Almost immediately, and like a scene from a movie, we all screamed, dropping our tools, nails, and pieces of wood for the treehouse as we sprinted back towards my friend's house. We frantically told my friend's mom what we'd seen, and to no one's surprise, she dismissed it as childhood imagination. We're now all over 20 years old, and we are still in agreement that we saw a glowing, white-haired woman dressed in a white gown in the middle of the woods who pointed at us. When I was around 12 years old, my friend had invited me to stay over for his birthday. He lived near an orchard field in Yakima, Washington. My brother came with me, 14, and a few other friends. We watched a movie, ate cake, etc., and it started to get pretty late. My friend's dog ran away a couple days back, and I brought up the idea to look for him that night since we had a few people. We also like to run around and explore, so I thought this would be fun. We got some flashlights and binoculars and started into the orchard/forest. We went from the road onto some beaten trails and then deeper into the orchard where there was a creek and hills on the other side. At this point we were just walking and talking, and then I saw something out of the corner of my eye, like someone standing on top of the hill. I pulled out the binoculars, and when I looked again, it was running down the hill right towards us. It was huge, it looked furry, but was standing on 2 legs. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I saw that the tall grass it was running on was being flattened behind him. I couldn't believe it, so I gave the binoculars to my brother and told him to look. He grabbed the binoculars and looked up for about 5 seconds, dropped the binoculars on the ground and ran straight back to the house. Didn't even say one word, just ran as fast as he could back to the house. I am 22 now, and he is 24. Sometimes we talk about it, our mom likes to bring it up. We don't know what it was, but we both agree it wasn't human. Me and my friends Mike, Haley, and Lois are all hanging out as we often do on weekends. We're just chilling in 7-Eleven eating our pretzels and drinking our soda we had bought when we got a text from this girl Melanie. I have the text right in front of me, so this is exact. So me and Jill found this creepy abandoned house and we want to go in. Some convincing of Haley and Lois later, we meet up with Melanie and Jill. A lot of people I know don't bother trying to keep track, only a few end up being important. After some walking about the neighborhood, it's about 11 o'clock, and we get to the house. Standard creepy abandoned old house, boards on windows to keep stupid teens like ourselves out. We go into the backyard, gate was open, it's basically a small little rectangle with a pool in the middle with a cover over it. We end up just breaking a lock that was on the back door to get inside the house. The house was kinda just run down and normal at first. Now, for the scary things. I'm with Jill, and everyone else is pretty much scattered about the house doing their own exploration. Me and Jill trek up the stairs and go to the first door on the right. Before we even go in, Jill is flipping out. I open the door, and I see a chair in the middle of the room, with nothing but mirrors all around. Glass shards were all around the chair with what I would assume to be blood on them. Jill for some odd reason seems to just calm down, and then she wants to go into the attic. So I pull the little string and the staircase into the attic comes down. We both climb up and it's a really tight space, you had to crawl to fit. Jill goes in first, crawling around, looking at shit that was left up there like books and whatever. And then, we heard a growl. Now everything I'm telling you next happened in the span of about 5 seconds. And I cannot attest to it being real or a sort of manifestation of fear. I looked over, saw a gray-skinned black-haired girl, yup, exactly like the Grudge, just laying, growling. Jill flipped out and fell through the space where the staircase up was. Somehow, her hitting it sent it up, leaving me in the attic. I ripped the mutlet tool from my hoodie pocket and started smashing around the attic staircase in a massive panic. I hear it crawling and dragging even closer. Then finally, I felt something just barely touch me. I smashed down so ducking hard you wouldn't even believe it. Something in the staircase broke, allowing it to come down, so I fell and fractured my wrist. I looked up and it was gone. Also, Jill's a witch for not ducking opening the staircase. Earlier this year, me and my friends went exploring in the woods in my neighborhood. We eventually ran into a tiny abandoned house with a small pond in front of it. Naturally, we go inside. Of course, all the windows and doors are smashed in, so there was no problem getting inside. We look around the first floor and we just see some broken glass and nothing out of the ordinary. It only gets weird as we head to the second floor. I'm a little coward, so I was freaked out and was at the end of our line walking up the stairs. As my first friend makes it to the top of the stairs, a strong, cool gust of wind blows on all of us and my friend sprints down the stairs dodging us. We all follow him and we meet outside the house. He was shaking and said he saw clear people. We all make fun of him, except me cause I'm a Psy, and they go back inside except him. One of my other friends stays outside with him. We make it upstairs and I see what I will never forget for the rest of my life. There was no clear people, but there was dead skinned squirrels everywhere. Not only that, but there was like devil worshipping pentagram shit drawn everywhere. I have never run so fast in my entire life. We sat outside in silence. We look back and the first friend and he's sprinting through the woods. We look back at the house. There in the window was the skinniest dude I've seen in my life staring right at me. We all get home and tell my parents and of course they don't believe us. We have been back there a few more times but we have never been close again. I've had nightmares about it for a while now. Oh yeah, and to describe the layout, we looked around outside before we went inside the house. There was a shed in the back where we found books, weird tubes with giant cans that went into the ground. I'm convinced there's bodies in there, and a tiny metal fence that made a square shape about 5 yards across with barbed wire facing inward. So the moral of the story is don't explore in the woods with friends. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side, the real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired, out of nowhere? Well yeah, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull up, and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. The roads weren't empty. I came across another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22, and then fell asleep. Some time later I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rear view mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the damn hook killer, you know, the one that scratched the couple's car and then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate? Duck that, I thought to myself, so I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a ducking car, parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rear view mirror. I didn't see anything, and all of a sudden, this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, "Hey! Hey you! Get the duck out of your car! Now!" I noped the duck out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story? Don't ducking sleep on the side of a deserted road. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course I always end up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tried. So, one night I wake up to the prickly feeling. Like an instinct. Just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in this ducking tree. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. Dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with the dogs to beat the wax off the hot head. I tremble in Mama's arms until Dad comes home and says he saw no one and to go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I fill in my sister in as to what happened. Dad is making regular rounds in the house with a cup of coffee. We're all still and I finally think I can sleep. Nope. I notice the man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a shush signal and runs away. Just turns around to run a straight line away. I swear I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours.